For me, the most important part of playing for me is the sound. I think that every person has more or less a personal sound. Maybe people haven't found it yet, or maybe they're not looking for it.
Today, we're digging into the concept of sound and developing your own sound. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and that was Dan Styffe, the principal bassist of the Oslo Philharmonic, and just a wonderful soloist and teacher, very eloquent person. I love that to just sort of frame this conversation and kick it off here. You're going to be hearing from many people from different walks of life and different parts of the world and from different time periods. That's what I love about doing these. We're pulling clips from the early days of the podcast right up until present day, and it's just such a thrill for me to put these together. I should do them more often. I really learn a lot. A quick shout out before we get rolling here to our sponsors: Steve Swan String Bass, D'Addario Strings, The Bass Violin Shop, Upton Bass, Modacity, A440 Violin Shop, and Colstein Music. More on them later in the show. So we, like with all these highlight episodes, have people discussing from their personal interviews that I had with them, certain topics. So we're talking about sound. We're going to start with Christine Hoock, the wonderful German bass player, about the importance of listening to yourself.
And a lot of people forget to listen themselves. If you always listen to yourself, that helps a lot.
Yes.
Helps you playing really in tune. So if you play false, so if your ears are not mad, most people really have good ears. So if you really listen to your intonation, you will not play false. If you really listen to your sound, you will get some ideas. And with these ideas, you should experiment. A lot of people try to, they play the pieces and try to make it okay. And when I get the question, shall I make here a crescendo? That makes me crazy. So what's your idea of the piece? Yeah. So some people, they don't start really with having ideas. So I think the leading yourself from starting practicing from the first note of the scale till the moment on stage. So this leading yourself, it's an important thing. And the ears, they are so powerful instruments to help you. They are the most powerful. And in this moment, you are the own teacher.
We continue with David Allen Moore. This is from my original interview with him from, I want to say, 2009 or something like that, so over a decade ago, talking about the specificity of orchestral sound. And I've thought about this line ever since I heard him utter it. Here's that clip.
In an orchestral setting, the kinds of strokes and the kind of timbre that you want, it really is a different animal. I mean, I don't think there's another instrument that really compares to what we have to do in terms of adapting to different scenarios. I mean, I always tell my students, especially in the orchestral setting, that it's probably the most obscure instrumental sound on the face of the earth that I can think of. I mean, because you can walk in, you can go to Amazon, or you can go to, I would used to say go into a record store, but those seem to be kind of few and far between these days, and, find in the world section, an album of any sort of obscure ethnic instrument you want. But if you want to hear really high-level quality orchestral bass playing, it's something that you have to be around a great teacher. That was something that I experienced working with Hal, working with Ed, working with Paul, working with all these people, getting to hear it firsthand. But it wasn't something you could just kind of go out and get.
I love that clip from David. And by the way, all these full episodes are linked up in the show notes, so just visit them on our website, contrabassconversations.com, or it's going to be in the notes for however you're listening to this, so you can listen to David, listen to all the other people. And next up, we've got David Murray talking about Gary Carr, his experiences working with Gary Carr, and the paramount importance of your sound.
Gary he was always so much about sound, and I think that's what so much separated him from everybody else, especially back in the 60s. I mean, I think now we're in a position where, if you look back, I think Gary had more influence on anybody, even if they weren't a student, than he probably even realizes. But way back in the 60s, he was the only one doing what he was doing. Mm-hmm. And people just didn't sound like that. And, a lot of bass players jumped on him for sounding that way. And he was like, no, this is the way I play. This is what I do. And I know it hurt him sometimes, but that's just what made him who he was, who he is. And I still listen to Gary and I hear that sound, and that just goes right to my core. I mean, right to my heart and soul. And no matter how many times I've heard him play, I still get a charge out of listening to him. And he's the one that really focused and got me to focus my ear to that sound. And then he also would say, you know, listen, especially back in the 70s, we didn't have the players, I don't think, well, we didn't have the access to the players that we have today. I mean, we didn't have internet, we didn't have that many recordings. Mm-hmm. And, you know, you can find all sorts of stuff on YouTube now. But back then he said, listen to the really great singers and really great violinists, really great pianists, and what do they do that you really love? What about their sound gets you really turned on, and what can you do to make that work in your own playing? And I think that's a really important message, and a message that, you know, we can still think about and honor today. Because that's still the first thing that I will be attracted to or not in somebody's playing is, do I really enjoy listening to the sound of that person? And if I do, then I will enjoy their performance. But if not, if I don't like the sound, I'm turned off totally.
Keeping track of what you practice is so critical. And my practice companion, Modacity, it does it for me. It's so awesome. Here's Modacity founder and CEO Mark Gelfo on how this works.
Accounting before the spreadsheet was manually handwritten ledgers, and that's where most musicians have been for the last 200 years. And it's time to automate that and save some time and let people focus on what's really important, which is performing on their instrument.
And that is exactly what Modacity has done for me. I feel so much more focused and energized and enthusiastic about practicing. I love this app so much. You can learn more at modacity.co and visit our website for a special offer for lifetime access for this app. Such a cool piece of technology. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast, Modacity. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. What happens if strings aren't quite the right size for your instrument? For instance, if you play a 5/8 bass, when strings are slightly too large for an instrument, the tension will be lower. And when strings are slightly too high for an instrument, the tension will be higher. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Do you need to play a bass beforehand that you purchase? Here's Gary Upton of Upton Bass on that topic.
I hear these kind of truisms stated by retailers like, you have to play the bass that you're going to buy. I think that's the worst thing you can say, because...
Great if you live in New York City.
Yep.
Yeah.
That's it.
or have 10 grand you can spend on traveling. Right? But sometimes you have to trust people, right? And sometimes you have to trust someone's reputation, sending out those videos, and I can hear it and I can feel it, and I trust this company's not going anywhere, and da-da-da-da-da-da. That's what I tried, right, Eric? I really drilled home. I said, you know, for a long time, like, give them more pictures.
Yeah.
Give them the videos.
Give them everything they need to make a decision.
The reputation of Upton Bass is stellar. People know, like, and trust them through all the great content they've put out online and through time and time again delivering on their promise of quality and consistency no matter what level of bass you're purchasing. Learn more at uptonbass.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Next up is a clip from my conversation with Jodziewicz, such a fascinating bassist. I just love the path that he's been on. Definitely check him out if you haven't before. And this is all about developing your sound by immersing yourself in music and style.
Listening is referring to listening to other people play, and it's also referring to listening to yourself play. So you know, in the practice room, you're listening, and what you know, I think one of the big things, in fact, a bass student, I forget what college he's going to, but I just got an email a few weeks ago from a student who was you know, said he wants to try and get into playing fiddle music on the bass and isn't sure where to start, and what I wrote back to him, and it's the same advice here, is to try to surround yourself with it. It's one thing to listen to Edgar Meyer and hear, hear some things that sound fiddle like that he's doing, and try and do that. But it's another thing entirely to like go to a festival and just hang out and like slink up to the back of a jam session and just start trying to play with people and just get it in your head, get it to the point where you're going to sleep at night and you just have all these tunes and this bow groove and all this stuff just like going around in your head.
Next up, we've got James VanDemark from my interview with him, again, a couple of years ago, 3 years ago, something like that. At this point, talking about skill development and the importance of developing your sound.
It's not even that the topic is frightening, but the challenge of getting students to recognize the range of what they need to do is so important. And I think one of the things, very basis of it, I guess for me, is making certain that a student can play a good legato. It seems simple, and yet I think many string players find a really beautiful legato at any dynamic level a real challenge. And so whether it's through scales, slow scales, bowing patterns, slur 2, bow 2, 3, 4, 5. A lot of people can't, bow 5, separate 5, do it metronomically with skill and then a beautiful sound. But to be able to go through drills like that builds up a kind of confidence in the bowing and a loose, easy set on the string, but one that can range from being very powerful, which again is a real sensitivity of, contact point, weight, speed, and then moving it back to something that, you're playing an orchestra audition, and this is not the time to sound like Leonard Rose playing Shlomo. And it's recognizing what to do. And a lot of it is kind of practice modeling. So what I do, I don't play a lot at my students' lessons, sometimes, but I always have a bass there, or I will use their instrument to kind of show, well, here's some possibilities, and here's how you might be able to do it. And then I usually present to them, what's your choice? How would you like to do it? Can you describe it? And then we see if we can find it, whether it's going to be in an exercise, in a phrase from, an excerpt, a solo, whatever. I mean, there's so many components. And so I use a lot of standard stuff, but frankly, what I find or have found is that often the information that goes with the material is more important than the material.
We've also got Mark Dresser from my live chat with him at his studio in San Diego, talking about the development of personal sound.
To do what I do might seem like an arrogant space, but this is what to become an artist and to find your own music and find your own space. I always felt that's what being a jazz musician, being a musician was. Mm-hmm. Also, that was a part of the tradition. Find your sound, mm-hmm. find your voice, mm-hmm. and it's like, and you don't have to find it. It's just there. Just get out of the way. Have enough technique and ideas, and have enough, enough that and flexibility that you can get to what you feel. And then, and if you can't get to it, why? And then, start sharpening this so you can, see what you hear and hear what you see. Mm-hmm. That was another line from one of my mentors, Jimmy Cheatham, who was a great bass trombonist, composer and arranger, worked with Chico Hamilton. He played with Duke Ellington for a hot minute. Anyhow, he taught here for a while, and he was just a very empowering guy. And so I've had a lot of real inspiring people who've given me the green light, mm-hmm. saying, affirming that they saw something and giving me, kind of permission mm-hmm. to continue. Because it's not like I knew where I was going. It's just like one foot after the other.
This episode is brought to you by Steve Swan String Bass. And you know, there's a lot that goes into being a bass player beyond that initial purchase of a bass. We need bass bows, we need bass covers, we need stands, we need new strings, pickups, wheels, quivers, upgraded gear like tuning machines, end pins, repair parts, all of that. And when someone's looking for some new bass gear or to upgrade something on their bass, I send them to Steve's shop. He's located just south of San Francisco in the Bay Area, and he is the largest dealer in basses between Los Angeles and Canada. That is a big distance, folks. Learn more at steveswanstringbass.com, and thank you so much, Steve, for sponsoring the podcast. A question I like to ask people on the podcast is, what advice would they give their 18-year-old self? And here's Barry Kolstein of Kolstein & Sons answering that very question.
I think as an 18-year-old and, or even in my early 20s coming into the shop, everything like that, a lot of it was laid out for me. There was a plan, that I was given a plan, which I often say I've done a good job, and I'm proud of what I've done with the shop, and I continue to be proud. But, I was given an opportunity, and I always respect self-made people, that weren't given that opportunity. It's what you do with the opportunity.
Barry has been providing bassists with opportunities through beautiful instruments, bows, cases, you name it. He's been doing this himself for 50 years, and the shop is celebrating their 70th year in business. Thank you so much for what you do, Barry. Check them out at Kolstein.com, and thank you for sponsoring the podcast. Okay, a few more to wrap up this episode. This is Matthew McDonald in what I think of as a particularly eloquent clip that is just talking about sound and using just some, in my opinion, just beautiful metaphors.
But also just playing long notes, trying to get the bass to resonate more and more, and seeing where this point is, where the bass almost seems like you can almost see light coming out of it, whether the overtones are so strong that you can almost see it. I'm just starting to enjoy just what you can get out of the instrument. And I think a lot of the thing is finding what the instrument needs. I think a lot of the time we give our own will, knowledge onto the instrument. And sometimes just having the patience to find out what the instrument needs, just kind of spending time with it, not necessarily trying to achieve anything except getting to know it better. So I still spend. Sometimes I get lost in a trance just playing open strings, just trying to get them bigger and bigger and bigger. Or I'll spend at least 5 minutes on one note, seeing what I can do, getting nearer the bridge, adjusting the speed and stuff like that. But one note practice is great. Just staying on one note, trying to find a great color, and also always trying to find that sweet dolce piano color near the bridge, because we know how to do it for tasto, but I think it has a more vocal quality if it's closer to the bridge. Listening to older violinists, so much of that sweet sound is just this incredible contact point, the perfect kind of cherry-colored sweetness you get by the right weight and the right vibrato near the bridge. I think these days a lot of people opt on all instruments more for the kind of fluffy tasto as the kind of effect. The problem is if you do that on bass, you're basically miming.
Michael Klinghoffer, who also studied with Gary Carr, has thoughts on sound that I think are really fascinating. And I love this interview. Michael is great. This is one of the few interviews where I actually, because I was working a full-time job at the time we were talking, I had to fall asleep and then wake myself up at something like 1 a.m. or something like that. So if I sound tired here, that's why.
Can you just elaborate on how maybe Gary Carr and then how you approach producing sound and teaching vibrato?
Okay. So first of all, the sound. And I will start with my personal thing, which is kind of an axiom that there is or there should be expression in the very sound. Before we even play a melody, just the sound has to be expressive. The sound has to touch somewhere. you hear different recordings. I remember an experience I had in Paris. There was a street player. He played some Japanese instrument or Chinese one-string bowed instrument, and the sound was so amazing. Forget the melody. The melody is not important. It was about the sound. So on the philosophical level, this is what I believe in, that there is expression in the very sound, or there should be. Now, about the sound in general, what I try to do is let the instrument resonate. Let the instrument resonate. We don't need to use force. The sound happens because energy is released, not because we do something. We have our arm weight on into the string, and then we start moving, and we can't move because the arm is too heavy. And if we slowly release the weight, then the bow will start moving. Just like in the pizzicato, you accumulate energy and you release it. It's not like in percussion, where you do something and you get a sound immediately. The sound in percussion is a result of what you do. With the bow, it's different. It's the energy that you accumulate and then release.
Again, much more from Michael on this topic, and you can check out Michael and everybody else and their complete episodes in the show notes. Next up, we have Pablo Aslan, who I could probably have on the podcast every week and never run out of things to talk about. And this is all about, again, the importance of not only making your sound your own, but also just doing your own thing.
Yeah, I just feel like if you're going to make some music, don't make a chunk of somebody else's music unless you're like seriously recreating. Like, my Piazzolla album is a Piazzolla album or whatever, but there's an angle, there's a reason why it's there. I don't know. I feel like, I don't want to put other people down, but I think it's kind of lazy not to say, well, what's my take on this?
Yeah.
Why am I doing this? Sometimes you do an album, it's like, yeah, this sounds like everything else, or this sounds like Coltrane in the 50s. It's like, that's done. What do you feel,
Right.
Coltrane he wasn't making 50-year-old records. He was making his records, And so was everybody else, not just the geniuses. I think that otherwise, I'll make whatever you want if you pay me, but under whoever's I'm a professional. But if you're gonna put an album, you do. And the truth is the first album I did of my own, where I wrote the music and stuff. I said, I can't. I'm not Gil Evans, and I'm not so and so and so and so. I'm just gonna do what I can. Yeah. And so that also has something to do with it. I don't have the Berkeley chops to say, I'm going to write these scars the way I was taught, and it just kind of comes out that way. And then I realized, that's what you're supposed to do. That's what everybody said to me. Do your thing.
I remember asking Thierry Barbe an impossible question, which was, how do different sounds relate to different countries, and how do the instruments affect that? And just one of those things that's fascinating to think about, but really almost impossible to answer. But Thierry did a wonderful job.
You're a well-known name in French bass playing, and obviously Francois is too. I don't know if you could speak to just any general differences between the way people teach, perform in France versus maybe some other countries.
Mm-hmm. Well, for me, the playing is not so different, but I think the basses are different in France. They are more cello-like, with clear sound, and some French bows. Also, the French bow also has a clear sound, so it makes solo instrument rather than orchestral instrument sometimes. However, all our 19th century big basses have a very nice deep sound, of course, but from the 20th century there is more and more cutted basses with Nani form, And so clear sound, little basses. And I know that Gericka, for instance, likes a lot the little basses sound, clear sound in the orchestra, because it's very precise. So we could have both big basses and also little basses. We have that in opera. And I agree with Gericka, because This is our school, in fact, in France. Well, I could say also it's harder to play in section because the sound is more clear. And if you go in Germany or Italy, the old Italian basses and German basses are absolutely darker. So it's very easy to play because you are hidden behind this very dark sound. So the French basses expose our sound sometimes too much.
Okay, yeah.
You see what I mean?
Yes.
Yes. This is why I prefer to have very dark bow to correct the clearness of our basses sometimes.
We will wrap up today's episode with a clip from Volkan Orhon of the University of Iowa, wonderful soloist and teacher, talking about the importance of the bow, the primacy of the bow in your sound.
I actually focus a lot on bow at first, especially early stages. I think I learned this from my first teacher, Tahir Sümer in Turkey, and he had this book of bow variations, actually, Kurt Möhel, the methods books. I mean, you probably know them. So the book has a lot of bow variations on simple etudes and things like that. So I work on these with my students every week. I kind of ask them to bring at least 5 variations on whatever the etude that they're, in the book. And we talk about, bow speeds, or each bow variation, bow weight versus speed and placement, bow mapping. All of these, I think, has a lot of information that they need to learn. I always thought bow is a separate instrument because you need to really, everything from, it comes from the bow with your voice to kind of like your dynamics or your articulation, clarity. All of that, really, we need to learn that so much more, to me, intensely to understand, because, it's kind of like an extension of your arm. Some people, call it. And I do believe in that. I think you need to feel that it's kind of part of your body. It's kind of like pitsing. You're in first contact with the instrument to make sound, but with the bow, you have this kind of instrument that actually is in between. So you need to learn everything about it, in my opinion.
Well, that's going to do it for today's episode, all about developing your own sound. I hope you got a lot out of this, and I hope you visit some of these people's full interviews and listen to them. There's much more in the archives, and there's much more to go in this series. We're taking the month of March here in 2020 to go back, take a look back around certain themes that are evergreen, universal. And the way that we do this is because Krista Copper, who is just so fantastic in the work she does for the podcast, she goes through and tags where these things happen. So it allows me to go back and synthesize like this. Not only does she tag them, but she creates these lists of potential topics and who talked about what and when. So thank you to Krista. Also, thank you to Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring, the rest of the Contrabass Conversations team. And Mitch makes beautiful basses in the Dallas area, just east of Dallas. Look him up at mitchmooring.com. I'm your host, Jason Heath. And reach out to me, feedback@contrabassconversations.com. You can follow us anywhere you hang out, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, Instagram, and whatever platform there may exist. When you're listening to this now, we're probably there. So tag along with us, and we appreciate any likes and shares and anything like that, of course. So thank you for listening, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.